So thank you everyone for coming today. I would really like to welcome Victoria and Jessica from Latitude Law, both trainee solicitors, who are going to share their knowledge and expertise today on student visas and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to be here with you today. We're going to go through our slides, some of which are quite detailed, maybe different points that we pick up on from the slides. And then at the end, we'll go through some questions that you all may have. So there may be a point, hopefully, that we answer a query that you had in mind. So do bear with us as we go through. We're going to be taking turn to discuss different areas. And I'm going to start a little bit about student visas. So for the majority of you, currently at Lancaster University, you're studying at a higher education institute that already has a proven track record of compliance as a sponsor with the Home Office. So I think most of you may know that you are already committed to work within the restrictions, within the conditions of your leave as a student. But that does depend on the type of course you're studying. So whether that's part-time or full-time, and your degree level. And so if you're permitted to work, and this will normally be reflected on your biometric residence permit, you can't be self-employed. This is a common restriction with most visa types. There's often restrictions on being an entertainer, a sports person or a sports coach. That restriction on a sports person often comes up within the immigration rules, but crucially, you can't fill a permanent full-time vacancy. So you're being sponsored with leave here in the UK as a student. So you wouldn't be able to fill a permanent full-time vacancy except if that is part of a foundation program. If you're working as a student union sabbatical officer, or again, quite important, if you're waiting for the outcome of an application to switch to graduates or a skilled worker route, which could be applicable to most of you. And both of those routes, graduate and skilled worker, Jess and I will cover in the talk today. So it is important to note that the hours that you can work really depend on the level of the course that you're doing and what time it is, whether you're in term time or in vacation time. So just touching on that, the work conditions for students at a school like Lancaster University, if you're full-time at degree level or above, so if you're doing your bachelor's degree, you can always work part-time during your term time, which can be up to 20 hours a week. And then that's full-time during vacations. That also includes before your course starts, and again, importantly, after your course is completed. There are some courses where a work placement is important, and that's part of what you're studying. And again, there's a student union sabbatical officer. If you're holding that type of permission, then you could have up to 2 years when permission is granted, but only for that purpose. So that is kind of a more unique position. If you're doing a full-time course, but that is actually below degree level, then you'd only be able to do part-time work during term time, and that's 10 hours per week. Again, full-time during vacations. And again, the same conditions apply, whether there's a work placement as part of your course, or if you're acting as a student union sabbatical officer. So if you're doing a part-time course at post-degree level, this is more important. There's no work allowed, even for work placement. So it is very important to consider your needs for work whilst you're here in the UK as a student, and whether the conditions around your leave as a student really are tying in with your work permission and what you need. So I'll just hand over to you, Jess.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly cover a few more points covering student leave. So yeah, student leave can be extended, and the usual requirements are that the student has an unconditional offer for a place on a course with a licensed student sponsor, and that study will be at a higher level than on current course, which is known as the academic progression requirement. There are a few circumstances where the academic progression requirement doesn't need to be met for an extension application. I won't go through all of those, but they're listed below. Probably the most common ones are for resitting and repeating modules. But there's other things there, for example, completing a PhD that was started on a previous grant of student leave. So in those scenarios, you don't have to meet the academic progression requirement. Obviously, student leave allows to study on the course which, in relation to which leave is granted. So if you want to change course, you would usually need to apply for a new visa. An exception does exist for switching to a new course at the current university if the new course is degree level or higher and not a lower level than the current course. It's full-time, it can be completed within the current grant leave, and your university confirms that the new course is related to the existing course, and in combination they support your career ambitions. Just lastly, there is of course the requirement of student leave of engaging academically with your course and making sure that you attend required seminars, tutorials, submit work that's required and sit exams, and it's important to make sure that you do engage academically, because as it says below, it can eventually lead to withdrawal of sponsorship. Your university will have their own system for monitoring that, so they're the best people to advise on that point. So now Victoria is going to go into the graduate route with you.
So once you are coming towards the end of your studies, you may start to be thinking about what you want to really be doing, particularly with your leaving the UK. So the graduate route is fairly new. So that was introduced last year in July 2021, and is for all international students who have successfully completed an eligible course of study at bachelor's degree level or above. So this type of visa does offer quite a bit of freedom to recent graduates. So you'll be able to stay and work in the UK for a period of 2 years. If you have been doing a doctorate degree, that would be 3 years leave. There may be slight downsides to the graduate visa are that you can't extend leave on this route. It doesn't lead to settlement, but you could count the time spent on that route towards maybe a future long residence application. And there are specific requirements that you need to meet that cover validity, suitability, and eligibility in much the same way that you may have met these sorts of requirements for a student application in the first place. So let's look into them a little bit more. I'm going to move on to validity. So validity focuses all on the practicalities of making an application, making sure that you've chosen the correct form, for instance, and that you pay the correct fees. We've put the fees on the slides there for you, just so that you can consider them. Again, I think in Home Office terms, the fees are quite affordable for the graduate route. So the actual fee, the actual application fee is £715, but you would again be paying the immigration health surcharge, which is currently £624 per year. So we put the totals on there for you, whether you were maybe at bachelor degree level or PhD level. So it would be 2 years or 3 years leave. All of those fees need to be paid at the time that you submit your application. And then you'd have to be enrolling your biometric information. So again, many of you may be used to this if you'd already made an entry clearance application as a student. In the UK, when making an application, you may have to go to an in-person appointment, or you might be able to use a mobile phone app, which will be quite fast, quite useful for this type of application. The supporting evidence we'll cover very briefly soon, but essentially you need to provide evidence that proves your identity and nationality. You need to be in the UK when making this type of application, and you must hold or have last been granted leave as a student. So that's quite crucial. You can't have held leave in any other category when applying for the graduate visa. If you have been awarded a scholarship or some sort of sponsorship for your fees, you may need to provide further evidence. But again, decisions are issued fairly quickly. The service standard currently is 8 weeks of biometric involvement, but again, we do see decisions coming back much faster than that, particularly if somebody's using an IDV app where there's been no delay waiting for an actual in-person biometric appointment. Suitability. This focuses very much on good character and conduct, and is applicable to the majority of immigration applications that you'll be making. So you can't be in breach of immigration laws or be on immigration bail. And you really need to submit your graduate application before your student visa expires. So we're talking about an in-time application, making sure that your leave here is continuous and that there's no periods of overstaying. The general grounds of refusal focus on the more serious aspects relating to good character, such as criminality, any sort of deception, any way that you may not have been very clear with the Home Office or provided false documents to them. We thought it worth highlighting that the general grounds for refusal also include a provision about outstanding NHS debt. So if there's anything within your time here in the UK where you have been asked to pay money to the NHS, do make sure that all of that is cleared, because that could affect the good character considerations that the Home Office will undertake when processing a graduate's application. So eligibility, this is a points-based system. So we're looking at these key eligibility requirements with successful completion of your course, that course meets a qualification requirement, and that you studied in the UK for at least 12 months. So we're going to look at those 3 areas in a little bit more detail. So I'll move on to this slide, successful course completion. So you must have been at a university, it's a higher education provider with a track record of compliance. And luckily you already are, you're at Lancaster University, and that meets this requirement. Then you have to have completed your course during your last grant of permission to study. I think Jess touched on changing courses maybe in those first slides. So if you did do that, you again must have completed that course to which you changed. And essentially, the university is going to tell UK Visas and Immigration, the Home Office, that you have successfully completed their course. They are going to check in with them to make sure that that is accurate. So the qualification, essentially, you've got to have successfully completed that course and have been awarded a bachelor's degree or a postgraduate degree. There are other relevant considerations for the degree that we've listed. So these tend to be more vocational. We've covered the area of law, medicine, education, other areas such as architecture. These types of degrees will be suitable for the qualification requirement that we need to consider. Again, if anyone here is in the student union sabbatical officer role, there are slightly different considerations that I think it would be worth taking advice on, just to make sure that you are making a correct application. And the study in the UK requirement. So I know that the pandemic disrupted study for a huge amount of people all over the world with the graduate application. So essentially, if your course was 12 months or less, you need to have been in the UK for the full duration of that course. You need to have been here to study that course. If it was longer than 12 months, you must have been here for at least 12 months in the UK. But the Home Office, UKVI, have recognised obviously the disruption that COVID has caused. So we put here about distance learning. So essentially, you could still meet the requirements to have studied in the UK, even if you had to undertake some distance learning between the 24th of January 2020 all the way up to the 30th of June 2022. So again, it does depend about when you entered the UK with permission as a student. So we put these 2 bullet points here for you to consider. If your course was longer than 12 months, if there was distance learning between those 2 dates, that would be disregarded by the Home Office. So you are a bit more secure there. If it was courses of 12 months or less, that is the focus with our middle bullet points here with those key dates. So if you just have a think, and if that does apply to you and you're a little bit unsure whether you would meet the study in the UK requirement because of the pandemic, again, you can always reach out to us at the end of the talk, and if there is a more complex query, we will deal with that more specifically. So if successful on the graduate route, you get that 2 years leave to remain, 3 years if you were a PhD student. So most people, that would be your 2 years leave to remain, and it's quite free. So with the graduate route, you can undertake employment. You don't need somebody to act as your sponsor. You can work for yourself. You could be self-employed. You could take up voluntary work if that's something you're interested in. Again, a typical prohibition, you certainly can't be working as a professional sports person, and you can't be claiming benefits. Again, no access to public funds is a common prohibition on most visas within the UK. So again, you could study with the graduate visa, but not if that type of study would be a course like another bachelor's degree, where it would be more logical for you to have made an application as a student. There is an update to the immigration rules where there's now no need for certain nationals to register with the police. And I think importantly, it's good to note that if you have used the identity verification mobile phone app whilst making your application under the graduate route, your status will be digital only. If you went to an in-person appointment, you'd probably still receive a physical biometric residence permit. But again, there are updates to the way that the Home Office are going to show people's immigration status that are coming in the next few years. So, but just a key point for you to know. And again, your dependents can apply. So if you do have partners and children, again, they can be applying on the graduate route as your dependents. Partners need to meet relationship requirements. So we're focusing on establishing evidence that your relationship with your partner is genuine and subsisting. Objective evidence of your relationship, such as a marriage certificate, for instance, would be useful to provide. You need to establish within your evidence that you intend to live together throughout your stay in the UK. So if you currently have a shared tenancy agreement or even have bought a property here in the UK, if there are joint correspondence addressed to you, that could be useful evidence. If you have children, they have to be under the age of 18 when making an application as dependents on the graduate route. You'd also need to really prove to the Home Office that there's suitable arrangements for their care and accommodation in the UK. So that involves showing that the property that they all inhabit with you is not overcrowded, that there's enough space for everybody. And if that child is 16 or over, but under 18, you need to establish that they're not leading an independent life. So for instance, that they still rely on you, they maybe still live with you and are under your care. So from our perspective, there are a lot of benefits with the graduate route. It gives you a freedom to take some time after you've completed your studies to work within a variety of companies who may not have a sponsor license, to consider voluntary work that may lead you potentially to a good route for work, or working for yourself for self-employment time in the UK. So even though it doesn't lead to settlement, it is possible to switch from the graduate route to another category that does lead to settlement. So if that is something that you are focused on, you do want to start to establish your life in the UK and build up your time here, the graduate route does allow that easy switch to another category. So for instance, if you were working for a company whilst on the graduate route, and that company holds a sponsor license, then you could switch from the graduate route to the skilled worker route, and skilled worker does have settlement after 5 years. So Jess is going to touch a bit more on the skilled worker route with you, but with the graduate route, we just have some frequently asked questions that commonly come up. So this first one, your university, your student sponsor is going to tell the Home Office by the date of application that you have completed your course. So the Home Office may delay consideration of your application until your university tells them that you have definitely completed that course. So issues that could affect that would be in our second question: can students submit before all course fees have been paid? So it is very likely that your university will not tell the Home Office that you have successfully completed your course unless you have paid the university all of your course fees. This could possibly stretch to anything as well as minor as library fees that you need to pay. You need to make sure that everything is completely settled with your university to allow them to confidently tell the Home Office that yes, you have successfully completed your course. If the name of your course has changed for any reason, that should be fine. As long as the course content is the same, that will be acceptable because it should still match most of the information on your certificate of acceptance of studies. Again, with absences, if you don't meet that 12-month requirement of studying in the UK, essentially, if you haven't travelled to the UK at all, you're unlikely to qualify for this type of visa. And so I think it is important just to consider if the pandemic did impact at all on the way that you were able to study here. And again, that more specific route, if you're a student union sabbatical officer, they can actually undertake 2 periods of leave. They would still be able to apply for the graduate route if those periods of leave as a student union sabbatical officer were consecutive, were next to each other. So the documents that you need to provide do focus very much on the standard ID documents, your passport, your BRP, your certificate of acceptance of studies. And if you do already have your degree, evidence of completing your qualification would be very useful. If anybody did sponsor you within your studies, you'd need a letter from them confirming they consent to the application. I think this is because maybe a body that is sponsoring you to study needs to confirm that they're happy for further applications, whether or not there is money involved, because they have already invested within you. So that could be a more direct discussion you have with anybody that has given you a scholarship or sponsorship. If we're talking about your family, if your dependents are applying as well, you need their identity documents and proof of your relationship and cohabitation in the UK as well. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Jess now, who's going to take you a bit more through the skilled worker route. So another option for you.
Thanks, Victoria. Yes, so the skilled worker route is another option that you may be able to go into straight from holding student leave. The skilled worker route is an option if, you know, say you've already received an offer of employment when you're still holding your student leave. It might be then possible to switch straight into the skilled worker route rather than going through the graduate route and then switching to the skilled worker from graduate. So if you do switch onto the skilled worker route, it means an advantage of that if you get onto the 5-year route to settlement earlier. As Victoria discussed, the graduate route doesn't need a settlement, whereas the skilled worker does. So an advantage of switching onto it at an earlier date if you can. Obviously you're already on that 5-year route. Again, it has the requirements, the validity, suitability and eligibility. Because validity and suitability similar to undergraduate route, then I won't go into those again. So it's just going through the eligibility requirements. It's a point-based route. And an applicant must be awarded 70 points. So there's 50 mandatory points, 20 for sponsorship, 20 for a job at an appropriate skill level, 10 for English language, and then 20 tradable points. So just to go through those mandatory points. So there's 20 points for sponsorship. So you would need a certificate of sponsorship from an employer that holds a sponsor license and a genuine offer of employment. So the employer would need to either already hold a skilled worker sponsor license, or it might be that they don't have one yet, but they're willing to obtain one in order to sponsor you. But for you to submit that application, they'll need to hold that sponsor license and have issued you with a certificate of sponsorship. And you can't make the application without that. And yeah, genuine offer of employment. You'll need to have a job at an appropriate skill level. So unlike graduate route, where you could essentially work in any job role, only certain levels of worker eligible for sponsorship under the skilled worker route, and you can find those job roles at appendix skilled occupations, and some are on the appendix shortage occupation list. If you had received an offer of employment, you thought you may be able to apply for a skilled worker visa in relation to that. It would be advisable to always check that list and see if it's a role that can actually be sponsored. Some roles also need an ATA certificate, and as it says, they are usually scientific engineering type roles and some others as well. And then the last mandatory point, English language. So if you've completed a UK taught bachelor's, master's, or a degree or doctorate, then that would usually be sufficient. And you can provide your certificate or grade transcripts or a letter from the university confirming that you've obtained that. If for whatever reason that isn't something you can provide, you may need to take a Home Office approved English language test in speaking, listening, reading and writing. So just to go to the tradable points. So they essentially relate to salary. Now under a skilled worker application, salary usually has to meet 3 different criteria. So as a general rule, the salary always has to be at least 20,600 a year for any role, and that's regardless of the number of hours worked. You'll also have to have a minimum hourly rate of £10.10 an hour, and will also have to meet the separate going rate for the occupation. So the different occupation codes, so that's the different types of job role, have different going rates, and that will depend on the type of work. So normally the salary has to meet all of those 3 separate requirements. Under some circumstances, though, the going rate, so that one that varies depending on each occupation code, can be reduced, and also in some circumstances the minimum salary requirement. So a few examples of when that can happen is, for example, if an applicant's a new entrant, so having studied a bachelor's, master's, a PhD or postgrad, completed the course or a PhD, in that case, then the minimum salary requirement can be reduced to 20,480. That £10 an hour, that still has to be met, but they can also then rely on 70% of their occupation code. Yeah, so whatever the variable salary requirement is, it would only need to be 70% of that. Another example is if the job that you intend to work in is listed on the shortage occupation list. So that's what I referred to on the previous slide. And so there are some job roles that are listed on there. If that code is on that list, then the same applies as above, but you can only need to be paid 80% of the going rate for that occupation. And then another example is if you have a PhD in a relevant subject, and in that case, there's a minimum salary requirement of £23,040, and then 90% of the going rate. So that means 10% reduction of the going rate. And there are some other reductions as well, depending on the qualification and role, but those are the main ones, so the most frequently applied ones. So just to go through other requirements, there's also a financial requirement for skilled worker application. If you've been in the UK for 12 months or more, this is automatically met, so then you don't need to meet a financial requirement. If you've been in the UK for 12 months or less, or so for example, it's entry clearance application, then you need to show evidence that you have at least £1,270 upheld for at least 28 days. And the 28th day of that period must be within 31 days of applying. The exception to this is a sponsor, so your employer can certify your maintenance on your certificate of sponsorship. If they agree to do that, you don't need to show evidence of those funds. And if you have any family members applying with you, so for example, a partner, you would need to provide evidence of additional funds, and that would depend on the family member and the numbers of them applying. And then lastly, some roles do require a criminal record certificate as well, so it's advisable to just check and make sure whether that's applicable to the job that you want to apply for. So just to go through the conditions of leave as a skilled worker. So leave is usually granted for 3 or 5 years. You can be granted less, so you could be granted leave for a year, for example, but the reason it's usually granted for 3 or 5 years is that the fees for an application up to 3 years is a lower fee, and then there's a higher fee for 3 years to 5 years. So usually people go for either 3 or 5 years. And how long you're granted for will be determined by the length that your employer has decided to sponsor you for, which will be listed on the certificate of application. So that's what the Home Office will use for granting the period of leave. So leave as a skilled worker will be subject to no access to public funds, and work is permitted in the role that you are being sponsored in. So some supplementary employment is permitted if it's on the shortage occupation list, or if it's in the same profession for up to 20 hours. But it's very important to note that when you're working as a skilled worker, your employer has duties to monitor you, make sure that you're working the correct number of hours, that you're coming into work when you're supposed to be. So if you're undertaking any kind of supplementary employment or studying, you're permitted to study, but as it says below, it's very important that it doesn't interfere with you carrying out your duties, because the Home Office do conduct checks, do conduct audits, and if they go in and they decide that you aren't there when you're supposed to be, you're working for a number of hours, that can have consequences for your leave and, things like sponsor license. Voluntary work is permitted, and as Victoria said before, the requirement to register with the police is abolished. And yeah, this is a 5-year route to settlement. So just go through the documents a skilled worker should provide. So valid passport and BRP, the certificate of sponsorship that I mentioned. So you'll need that from the sponsoring employer before you can submit the application, and that will just include details like your proposed salary, the hours per week that you'll be working, how long you'll be sponsored for. Evidence of how you qualify for tradable points. So that would relate to what I worked on before, for example, with if you had a PhD in a relevant subject, for example. So you then need evidence of that. So for example, your certificate. Financial requirement documents. So if you need to meet the financial requirement, you'll need to provide bank statements for that period. You need to either be in your name or your and somebody else's name, for example, like a joint account. And you'll need to have those, for at least 28 days and day 20 at least, 31 days of applying. English language requirements, maybe a degree certificate or English language test results, maybe a criminal record certificate. And again, as Victoria did discuss before, if you received a scholarship or sponsorship, your studies, a letter confirming that consent's given to the application. And then again, any documents related to family members who are applying. So for example, evidence of their relationship to you, like a marriage certificate. So that's a skilled worker route. Now there are a few other options for graduates. Some of the most common ones you've listed here. So for example, it might be that you are a family member of a British or settled migrant. It might be that it's possible for you to apply to leave on that basis, or if your partner, for example, if your partner is a sponsored employee in the UK themselves, it might be possible to apply for leave on that basis. Or if you've got a partner who's got leave under the EU settlement scheme, for example. And it's usually, for example, if you make a partner application, you would then be permitted to work as well. Another option is the innovator route, which Victoria is going to discuss in a moment. There's also the global talent based on exceptional promise. So this is a route that you require endorsement by an external body. The bar is quite high for this, and you need to show basically you're making an exceptional kind of contribution to the field. But that's maybe something to bear in mind if that applies to you. And as it says there, most of the above are 5-year routes to settlement, the exception being innovator, which is 3 years, and it's possible for global talent to also be 3 years. So I'm just going to hand back to Victoria now.
Thank you, Jess. So we thought it would be useful to just cover the innovator founder visa briefly with you. So this is really intended for somebody who's focused on starting a business here in the UK. So really thinking about your business idea. In terms of the practicalities of the application, they're going to be the same. Validity, suitability and eligibility is key. But we're not going to delve into validity and suitability because that's going to be similar to what we've covered already with graduates and skilled workers. So we're thinking about good character and following the correct format for your application, using the correct form and paying the correct fee. So the innovator application is slightly different to other types of immigration applications because it has a 2-stage process. Your first stage is endorsement. So applicants for this type of visa need to have that business idea or their business assessed thoroughly by an endorsing body. So they're really going to look into that proposed business idea and consider whether it really is innovative, is it unique, is it really different to other businesses that are already trading here in the UK. And importantly, they're also going to be looking into its viability. So have you been able to clearly show how your business is going to grow? This can be really explored in detail in a clear business plan to try and show an endorsing body that yes, you really have considered your viability. and the business has to renew. So I think that's quite a challenge. You know, it can't already be trading, and you need that really strong, unique idea. So if there's any niche markets where you feel you have good ideas, this could be a route for you. Once your endorsing body, you know, considers that your business is eligible, they will then provide a specific letter that says, yes, you have been endorsed, and then you'd be allowed to actually proceed to making an immigration application. So without the endorsement, you can't really continue. So that is important, that everything is clearly presented to an endorsing body. And so with the requirements at present, the rules still do state that you need £50,000 to invest in your proposed business, but this is set to end. So that need for that huge amount of investment is set to be scrapped by the Home Office. We are still waiting for, you know, clarification on the updates to the rules, but it is expected. Again, as just touched on with financial requirements, if you haven't been in the UK for 12 months or more, then you would need to show that you're able to financially maintain yourself with that fee of £1,270 that you've held in your account for 28 days. If you've been in the UK for more than 12 months, then that wouldn't apply. There are requirements for English language. So again, you need to show that you meet that requirement. If you've been studying here in the UK, your bachelor's degree, master's degree, what sort of level you've covered should be used for the application. If you don't believe your qualification would meet those requirements, you'd have to sit a specified English language test with a secure provider to at least level B2. And so there's not only the business side of this type of application, but you still need to tick those standard requirements for the Home Office around finances and English language. If successful, however, you get 3 years grant of leave, which you can extend again. There's a standard prohibition on access to benefits. You could study on this course, on this route, but again, that would be subject to any ATAS requirements, depending on the area that you're operating in. And I think crucially, Innovative does lead to settlement, and it's an accelerated route to settlement of 3 years, which is quite fast in terms of most immigration routes. So it is an interesting option, I think, for people to consider. And I'm going to hand over to Jess to cover, maybe another area that you may want to think about.
Yes, I'm just going to go through the startup visa briefly. I'm not going to cover this in a lot of detail because, as you'll see at the bottom, it's due to be withdrawn soon. And just waiting for the.
Sorry, Jen. Oh, sorry, Jen.
Okay. Waiting for the exact date. But so we're just going to go through it briefly now because it's still available at the moment. So the startup is similar to the innovator, but it's designed for those who don't have the business experience that the innovator requires. So again, you need to have a business or an idea, and you need to get an endorsement from an endorsing body. So it needs to be a new business, and again, it needs to be innovative. So unlike something that's already trading in the market, unscalable. So it's going to show potential for growth. Unlike the innovator route, you don't need that £50,000, but still need to show the 1,270 held for 28 days. Startup isn't a route to settlement. So if you were granted leave on startup and then you wanted to extend or switch, that would be into the innovator route. So you then have to meet the innovator route requirements. And yeah, as I said, it is going to be withdrawn soon. We're just waiting for that official date when it's no longer going to be available. So yeah, that's everything we wanted to discuss. Just in terms of how we can help with applications, we do offer free 30-minute consultations. And if you did want to, if you did have an immigration query and you wanted to discuss that with us, you can see there's a dedicated email address there. If you just send us an email, we can get you booked in for consultation and just discuss that query. If you did decide to instruct us, we can guide you through the whole process. So start with a detailed consultation and written letter of advice. Obviously, that's after you've received payment, and then just help with the whole application process. And that would include drafting a cover letter to the Home Office just to explain how you meet all of the requirements. Okay, so thank you. I think we'll be going through some questions now.
Yes, yeah.
I guess what I can Q&A.
Thank you both. Just to say as well, that email is for Lancaster University students only. So if you do want to contact Latitude Law, you can do so via their website. So there is an inquiry form on the website for any inquiries you have if you're from another university, just to be clear. We do have 55 questions, so I have tried to answer some of the more simple ones, but if you can give, if I ask the questions and you can fire off the answers as quickly as possible. I think the first one is, how soon do you need to apply for the graduate visa, coming towards the end of your student visa? What is that kind of application period look like?
Okay. Well, I think the key thing is successfully completing your course when applying for the graduate visa. So with that, you don't have to have attended your graduation ceremony, and you don't always technically have to have a certificate in hand. But if your university has definitively confirmed that you have passed all final exams, that all fees have been paid, then you would have been deemed to have successfully completed your course. So that's that element, and then you need to be applying, importantly, before the expiry of your student visa. So, I mean, often a student visa will give you, at least 3 months on the end of, you may finish your course and you have another 3 months left. So, as long as you're applying in time before the expiry of your leave, which is, the very last possible date you could apply would be the date your leave expires. But I mean, that would maybe give us a few heart attacks if we were running that application. I suppose that technically that could be the very, very final point. But please don't do that to us if possible. So yes, as soon as you successfully completed your course, and making an in-time application before the expiry of your leave as a student.
Yeah, and those average application periods at the moment, the processing is around 6 to 8 weeks, isn't it, for visas?
That's right. I think the service level agreement is still about 8 weeks on the government website, but again, they do tend to process this type of application quite quickly.
Yeah.
There's not, from our perspective, the evidence that you need to provide is not incredibly lengthy. You're focusing on your identity, nationality, and your course completion documents. So for the Home Office, in terms of their processing of it, there's not a huge amount that they need to be looking through. And so they do come back fairly quickly. We often get decisions before that 8 weeks. Just depend if you've had to wait to go to a biometric appointment, which, the Home Office aren't going to consider your application until you've completed biometrics. So if you're using the mobile phone app, that speeds things up. But it does depend on whether you are permitted to use the mobile phone app or not.
Brilliant. Okay. So somebody who is currently on a tier 4, who arrived in 2019, they're still entitled to apply to the graduate route.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So another one. I can only work 20 hours a week on my tier 4 visa. I study entrepreneurship and want to start my own business. Can I do this on the tier 4? But you mentioned the innovator visa.
Yeah, so again, so he wouldn't, this person wouldn't be able to be self-employed. They wouldn't be able to start their own business with leave as a student. How do I do this?
So I think it would be around the innovator visa and engaging with your enterprise center at your university. So if it's Lancaster, the enterprise center is called a work in progress, and they deal with all these startup visas. So I suggest, if you're not from Lancaster, contacting your enterprise center in your university, because they will have support around starting up businesses for international students.
And you would be able to be self-employed on the graduate visa. So if that is something you're considering, but again, if you're just thinking long term, if you are interested in actually establishing a business here, you really want to stay here long term, you need to be considering about switching to another route after that 2 years. So potentially it would be a smoother transition if you were starting with another type of visa. But as we said, that innovator and startup are subject to change, that we're waiting for details from the Home Office for.
And we do get a lot of questions about students, 2 types of leave questions. So the first is, if I leave the country at the end of my program but come in before my student visa expires and apply for the graduate route, will that affect my eligibility for the graduate route?
So no, as long as you your student leave is still valid. So you've gone out the country maybe for a brief visit back home and coming back to the UK, and you still have your student leave and that's still valid, even if you finished your course, then you would be able to apply for the graduate route, because you would be a person who last held leave as a student. So you would, be eligible.
But you have to be physically in the UK to apply for the graduate route.
Exactly, perfect, yeah.
And the other question I get from a lot of students, which has come in a couple of questions, is while studying on the student visa, you're coming to the end of your program, is it okay to go home and do the remainder of your dissertation at home, potentially do some things online? Would that affect the visa coming back at any point?
I think if it's a case of finishing things at home and then leave would expire, that wouldn't be an issue, because they wouldn't then be able to apply to graduate route.
Yeah, because they'd be out of the country.
Yeah, so and it would be an issue in that respect. Yeah.
And I would suggest, if you're considering doing any of your studies back home during a period of time when you're expected to be in the UK doing your program, whether it's your final project dissertation, thesis, or viva, that will be down to your program. I would always consult with your program as well, because they may have aspects of your dissertation project or viva that they would expect you to do in person. So do check with your program. Another question is, if I apply for any visa close to the expiry date of my current visa, would that, if that takes longer than the expiry date, am I permitted to stay in the UK until I get the results?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, because that's considered an in-time application. So as long as you make an application for the expiry of your current visa, that's an in-time application. So whilst you're waiting for the Home Office to decide, your leave here is protected. So even if the expiry date on your permit has expired, but you're still waiting for a decision, yes, your leave here is still protected until you receive that decision.
We're getting quite a lot of right to work questions. So obviously in the UK, employers, as part of the recruitment process, are asking if you have the right to work. We have a number of students who are pursuing the what was previously known as PSW visa, or the graduate route visa, and therefore are asking, do I say I do have the right to work, or am I saying no, I don't have the right to work? But in that question as well, employers are also adding, would you require sponsorship at any stage? So what is, in your opinion, the best approach to those questions?
Well, I think if you're looking at application form, it's asking you if you have the right to work. They're putting the onus on you in just an application as to whether you know that you have valid leave in the UK. So if you're here on the graduate route, then yes, you do have valid leave. But all employers have to conduct their own regulated right to work checks. That's mandated by the Home Office. So from what you're saying in an application form, okay, but then the employer does need to follow that up, specifically with you. And if your status is digital, I wouldn't be worried about that. I think some people do panic about not having a physical biometric permit, but employers aren't just allowed to check a permit and say that's fine. There's a lot more hoops that they need to jump through to confirm to the Home Office that you do have the right to work check. And I think that extends to all employees, even British nationals, that everyone has to confirm that they have the right to work, here in the UK. I think, and so that was part of your question. Apologies. What was the last thread of the question?
Employers are increasingly asking students, even applying for internships, say that are covered under the student visa, if they will require sponsorship in the future. And that is
that's a bit challenging, because if it depends on whether you want to remain with that company.
I mean, I feel like if you're switching into the graduate route, you wouldn't require it for 2 years.
Yeah.
So it might be that, especially if you're not applying for something that's going to be long term anyway, the answer would be no. I think if it was for example, like a 3-year grant scheme, that would be different because you would ultimately require sponsorship.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, if you're going beyond the conditions of the leave or the premises of the leave, yes. If it was just something where you weren't sure if you wanted to stay with that company and years, that's maybe you'd say you could just be very factual and say my leave as a graduate, for instance, will expire in 2 years, after which, yes, I would require sponsorship, just so you can just keep it, you know, to the fact, so that it's not
be honest, essentially. And and it is down to the individual's motivations. I will also say as well that companies cannot use your country of origin as a shortlisting criteria. So even if you need sponsorship, they shouldn't be using that answer in their recruitment processes. Some do, unfortunately, but sessions like this, for those that are listening, empower you to have positive conversations with employers, because not all employers understand the visa process, and there is guidance online, and there's organizations such as Latitude Law who can work with employers who are interested in going down the sponsorship route but might not know or have in-house specialists to support them. So do be careful when having conversations with employers, but the more you know about your visa options, the better and more positive those conversations you can have with employers. But don't assume employers know all the legal ins and outs associated with visas. So in that, I have I think we've answered quite a few questions about the right to work. And I know you've answered this, but just to cover it in case people were late to the session, the years of the graduate route visa, will those be taken into account when applying for residency? And can they help? Are they included in the lead up to indefinite leave to remain?
So yes, that time can be considered, yes, in relation to like a long residence application, for instance, if you've been here for 10 years, so the time on the graduate route would be something that you could use towards, as long as your leave here has been lawful and continuous, then you should be able to use that time and make that type of application. It is always worth being very careful if you're making a long residence application to really go through your immigration history and make sure that it has always been continuous. There's never a gap within your permission to remain in the UK.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing is around finance, providing proof of support when applying for the graduate route. Is that required?
Yeah, there's no financial requirement.
Okay. This kind of comes off the back of the question we asked earlier. And I think that you did answer this, Jessica, but just to confirm, so a student who's doing a 12-month long program, they decide to do their dissertation back home over the summer, which is 3 months. Does this affect the 12-month study requirement for the graduate route?
So how long is the program?
The program is 12 months long, but that's September to September, but they've decided to go home in June to do the dissertation until September. Their visa is still valid, but they're not physically in the country. Does that contravene the requirements required for a graduate route visa?
Yes, I think so. I think that would, because if it's a 12 months or less with your studies, then yes, you are expected to have been in the UK for the full duration of the course. And so the wording is of the course. So I mean, it could be arguable. I think that is something we may need to look into, because with 12 months or less, when it's longer than 12 months, we are looking for at least 12 months in the UK, aren't we? So we'd want that full 12 months here. But 12 months or less, and if you're out for 3 months, but your course is from September to September, and so I see what you're thinking with 9 months here. I think that is something that,
but the course is still 12 months. They're just not physically in the UK.
And personally, I wouldn't want to risk it. If it was me to get the opportunity to go forward. But I think for the full duration of the course.
If the course is still technically ongoing, then I think
would stay.
Probably be an issue for the graduate.
And that, I think again with the processing of the master is quite fast. There's any kind of question mark on there, that is going to slow it down. So I would keep as compliant as possible, and and remain in the UK.
Thank you. Could you just give a brief overview of what contributes to a 10-year residence application?
Sure. It could be, I suppose, any
form of leave. So you have to have, like, not that leave as a visitor, but any other form of leave to remain in the UK for a period of 10 years. It has to be continuous and lawful. If you submitted an application before the expiry of one period of leave, then it's lawful until you receive a decision on the application you submitted. So it doesn't count as a break in your residence if you made an interim application and then your leave expired while you're waiting for a decision. But yes, so it would, any kind of combination of leave provided you have that 10 years continuous residence.
Okay. This is a little bit out there, but it's around a visitor visa. So applying for a standard visitor visa to attend graduation. I know there's been a lot of delayed graduations due to the pandemic. So many students' visas have expired. So they're applying for visitor visas, but they've been asked to provide evidence that their fund supporter is happy to fund towards the trip to the UK, and the fund supporter is a parent. How would they do that, or what document would be required in that instance?
I suppose something as objective as possible, right? In terms of if they are the fund supporter and they are paying for the travel, maybe evidence of the funds held or a return ticket. If you're coming as a visitor, really the Home Office wants to see that you're a genuine visitor, and that entails leaving the UK. At the end of that visit. So that sort of thing, like a return flight tickets or evidence of the funds that your fund provider, your parent, is providing you with. If you're coming here staying in a hotel, proof from bank statements that they have that money to support you. But I suppose also if you have your graduation invitation, I would be as comprehensive as possible with any type of visit visa. But again, I would also counsel people to consider that if you are entering the UK as a visitor to come and attend your graduation ceremony, you wouldn't be able to then apply for the graduate route, because you'd be here as a visitor. You would no longer have leave as a student, so that route would be closed to you. Again, if you are here as a visitor, you can't switch in country to make applications. That the things that would be open to you, like skilled worker, you'd have to be making an entry clearance application from your country.
And as well, just to confirm, so I've had a few questions around students applying for jobs with employers who are not on the sponsor register or who are not willing to sponsor. Can they switch into the skilled worker visa with their employment letter? And I've answered no. They require sponsorship. So just to reaffirm that the employer must be your sponsor. So if they don't want to be your sponsor, potentially find a different employer. So the other question, and we've only got time I think for maybe one or two more questions, is if I switch jobs or companies during my skilled worker visa, do I need to apply again?
Yeah, I think generally yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. Because if you're switching jobs, that might be a different occupation code that would have different salary considerations potentially. If you need to be still with somebody who is on the register of licensed sponsors. So yes, it is something that you need to consider carefully. And also whether, if it's a 5-year route to settlement, if you are switching, consider is that definitely viable if you're coming towards the end of a period of leave and you have maybe 6 more months left to go. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to switch? But I know that there's your personal development consideration running alongside your immigration considerations there. So yes, it would be something, again, I would seek advice if anyone was considering switching, just to make sure that all of those requirements are met and to not impact on, again, continuous lawful residence, to not cause any issues when you're on a route to settlement like skilled work.
Okay, great. There was one last question, and this might be to those who are doing PhDs who've been in the country quite a while. But we have a number of PhD students who've studied in the UK for a long period, have been in the UK since potentially 2012, but for a period of time of 8 months went back home, or 6 months went back home. Do they still qualify towards permanent residency? after their graduate route visa has expired. So they've embarked on the 3-year graduate route visa for a PhD. If they apply for residency, does that 8 months count against them?
So it depends where you want to shift your starting point from. So if it was 2012, when in that year you had that really extended absence, you went out of the country for 8 months, then there are absence requirements that you need to consider for long residence. So that could affect it. But then if we're shifting the time scale, if we start from 2013 where all your absences were below 6 months, that could potentially work.
Yeah, I mean, I think if an absence of 8 months fell within that 10-year period, that would be, I think, would probably break continuous residence.
Yeah,
there are some exceptions.
Yeah, it does depend. Why, again, if something with the pandemic, impacted somebody being here in the country, that could be something that the Home Office would become more favourably. But I think if somebody's looking at a long residence application, again, I would really counsel getting advice, because you really need to look in a very detailed manner over all your absences over that 10-year period, which can be quite challenging. It's quite hard to build a clear picture and make sure, again, that all your leave was continuous, that there were no gaps in your permission to be here in the UK. But yes, potentially it could work, but it really does depend. Though I would ask that somebody considers retaining advice to make sure that those fees are more expensive for the Home Office, to make sure that you are not going to jeopardize your funds when you're making that type of application, that you're confident in it.
And quick question, does the right of appeal still exist? Can you appeal if you're rejected for a visa application?
It depends on the type of application. So some, yes, some things is a right of admin review, so to have the decision reviewed. It would depend on the type of application, and it would for example, if it's like a human rights application, then usually an appeal would be involved, and also if it's in country, if it's out of country. So it would depend on the type of application. And we would say if someone was to refuse for anything, we would definitely suggest seeking advice from an immigration system. Your
deadlines are normally quite short, so you need to act very quickly and to consider whether it is again worth you appealing. So if it is an appeals process where you actually want to go to the tribunal, here again that there's a lot of costs involved in that, you need to consider seriously whether that is definitely the most pragmatic way for you to go forward.
Right.
So again, depending on the type of application, some of them absolutely you must appeal, I suppose, because there's no other route for somebody, but it does depend.
Thank you so much. Just to reiterate to anybody, if you are going through the process of applying for a visa, whether it's the skilled worker route or the innovator route, it is recommended that you get immigration support for that, just to make sure that the employment offer meets the criteria required for the skilled worker visa, that the level of salary is right, because it also as well there's an issue around number of hours working, so that the hours reflect the salary. So having somebody who is an expert to look at that is highly recommended, so that you're not in a position where your application is rejected. I don't think you would necessarily need the support for the graduate route, because you were saying it's quite straightforward, but obviously do engage with immigration support if you have any questions about it, or you're not quite sure what next steps are. So I'm going to end the session there, because we have over 100 questions, and I don't think we would need 2 to 3 hours to go through all of those questions, but I think we have the main themes covered. The session has been recorded, so a lot of the questions, the answers are in the presentation, so just take your time going through the recording. It will be available in around a week or two. I will email all when the recording is available, so please don't email me asking, can I have the recording? It will be available once I release it. And yes, I promise you the answers are in the presentation. It's just going through it very, very slowly. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Jessica, for today. Fantastic session. I think we had over 230 attendees today, which is fantastic. And we look forward to speaking to you again, and we appreciate the work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much.
And you're getting lots of round of applause.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. What a great session. So accessible as well. It makes it really, I think, much easier as well to understand what is happening, what options are out there for international and EU students. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.